Welcome, creatives, community, and kind folks, to RPG with DBJ. I'm your host, DBJ. Sorry about the delay. Um, Very unprofessional of me. I sat down, I tried to get everything ready, and then um, a bio break was needed just before I went live. So I apologize for the delay. Uh, glad, glad you guys are here. I see our co-hosts are having a conversation and absolutely positively deals with today. So allow me to set the stage. So this week we're talking about the OSR, the old school, the O, which stands for old or maybe original, the S, which stands for school or maybe system, and the R, which may stand for rules or Renaissance. The OSR versus fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, or at least modern uh, modern day D20 Dungeons and Dragons fantasy, whatever have you. And we're doing a compare and contrast. um, you guys are so funny. I love our co-hosts here. They are the producers of the show. They give us our entertainment and brilliant, very brilliant comments on the side here. You of course can join live as well. A revival, yeah, rules, Renaissance, revival. But OSR's the acronym fits no matter how you spell it out, right? And I thought we would talk about monsters today. This entire week we're going to talk about OSR, but I thought we would talk about monsters, and we could talk about some of the practicalities, like the numerical values. But I think we're going to be talking about it holistically in terms of um, ever since the month of January, which saw ourselves in a kerfuffle with our the owners of the Dungeons and Dragons brand. A lot of people are moving towards other gaming systems or similar systems, but from other eras. And what is the thing that draws people to OSR, or what can we learn from old gaming and bring it into the modern age? And so I thought we would talk about monsters today. And today, you're going to hear me say things like Gygaxian as a definition, and you're going to hear me say things like puzzle monsters. And I've said this plenty of times on the show. We're going to talk about some other things as well, but um, some of the definitions you'll hear, like Gygaxian, I'm relating to gamous monsters that by present day we've kind of gone out of our way to explain why they exist, but they're pretty gamous monsters. The mimic is probably one of the most famous ones, but the gelatinous cube that happens to exactly fit down hallways, and what is the roper, which is a stalagmite, and a piercer, which is stalactite from the roof. There are a lot of these monsters that exist in the OSR, and there's a ton of them, by the way. And they existed in the realm of what adventurers would do to cause them to have challenges in the efforts of what they are attempting to do. So there were rot grubs because players would loot bodies. There were earworms or earwigs or whatever they were called because they would listen at doors. There was a I know there's a piece of art out there that's pretty hilarious where there's a carpet of smothering on the floor. There was one of these ooze like monsters that would look like the ceiling that would drop from above. There was a cloaker monster that was hanging on a rack. There was a mimic in the corner. It was like pretty. Oh, the trapper! The trapper was the one that fell from the ceiling. Yeah, rot grubs, green slime, the living wall. Forgot about the living wall. Yeah, there were a lot of these things. And listen, some of it's pretty ridiculous, but I'm going to defend it through this little dissertation here. Um, so one of the things that happens to have grown quite a bit in modern gaming is hit point sponging. Hey, want to make a monster tougher? Add more hit points to it. But I think something that has faded away, and it's pretty. It it boggles my mind a little bit, in the sense that from the beginnings of the OSR, a lot of these monsters really didn't have a background. Like I would say a good 50 to 70% of them, uh, even existing, was the idea that a wizard did it. Right? These monsters had barely a background. They were just there as a challenge, an impediment, an obstacle to get to the gold. We explained, why gold was an experience point measurement, rather than slaughtering to be an experience point thing. But as we went through the ages, they had the Dungeon Master's Guide, they had the monster compendiums, and they started making these monster ecologies that were pretty detailed. And the monster ecologies would open up our eyes, especially for the OSR, and go, "Ooh, I know a great way to use these monsters." And what ended up happening in the OSR was that a lot of the monsters and the places you would put them and the reasons why they were a challenge became more important than throwing them in a room and just having PCs fight them. So it's almost a bookend. From the very beginnings of the OSR, monsters were basically in rooms, and you'd open up another door, and it was unreasonable why two minotaurs were in a room next to a room with a couple of gargoyles next to a room with there was a bit of that nonsensicalness. But as the adventures they call them modules went on, and people start designing these adventures and using a bit more of the monster ecology, you'd go through the dungeons and realize, like, oh, well, there's a monster in one room, but let's talk about humanoids, right? They'd have the humanoid tribe in one room, and then maybe scouts or guards or something, and then they would have another room like the Keep on the Borderlands, where you'd have their families in there, and then they'd have captured victims, and then they'd have a featureless room, but it would have like storage room for food and items, and then there became a reasoning for why these monsters were in there. And along with that became an environment in which the monsters were used. And that really became the OSR's golden point for me, where monsters weren't just on flat plains. They were up on cliff sides and hanging from ceilings and deep underwater. And, these dungeons would have places where the monsters would be behind tapestries, or there would be something glittering at the bottom of a pool of water. You'd go to reach for it, and it was the monster itself. Or the there's a classic image of a oh, I have it in the module in the back. There's a classic image of a small rabbit on top of a tree stump, but the small rabbit, because PCs want to go, oh, there's the cute little rabbit, and then there's an image of a cute little rabbit, and then the image next to it was like the tree stump was a monster itself, and the roots were reaching up, and there were vines attacking the PCs and things like that. Pretty hilarious, but uh, I will say that it's funny. Like Mike's brings up the fact that dungeons were more than a place; they became an ecology unto itself. One of the most famous monsters, which dealt with the ecology, was the Otiog, where it basically was a waste disposal mechanism. That and the gelatinous cube. Yep, the rabbit on the stump was a famous one. There were a lot of these little things, and I want to say for you guys, like, because I want to get back to the conversation that you were having just before we went on air, that that as each edition, like John Wright mentions, as every edition that comes out, the monsters are become more and more nerfed. And I think part of the nerfing isn't just that they are less powerful, but it's weird to say this, but their capabilities are less. And so what I mean by that is there's less of the grabbing, blinding, stunning, draining, paralysis. Um, a famous creature is the cave fisher, and the cave fisher was, a subterranean monster, half insectoid, kind of a little bit like a spider and a crab. And the purpose of the cave fisher was it always attacked from above, send down some kind of tendril or proboscis or something that would be adhesive, grab a PC and draw them up in the air. Now, doesn't sound, when you hear about that, you're like, well, that's not really a big deal. But the point of it was when it would shoot down 30 feet or something and grab a PC and start to draw them up in the air, it was like, well, the PC grab, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I'm going to cut the tongue off this thing and get out of it, but then you're going to drop 30 feet, right? And that in itself, while not necessarily um it doesn't sound like a puzzle, but it is. It's the monster of alligators or sharks. They're like puzzle monsters. They're not just dangerous, but they're dangerous because they're not only going to kill you, but they're going to drown you when they barrel roll or drag you down into the depths of the of the sea or a river or a swamp or something. And a lot of these monsters, uh, yeah, Mike's like, oh my god, the level drain in older editions. These monsters did a lot of things. That's why the rust monster was around, because you had to worry about your weapons. There were all the oozes would destroy some aspect of flesh or metal or living material like paper or leather. Um, there were there was always something to worry about. Rot grubs would get on your skin if you started poking at dead bodies too often and too little bit. Of course, you have your classic mimics that were when the rogue would try to run ahead of the party and sneak into another room and start opening up chests. Of course, the mimic would attack, and then you had the other mimic like monsters: the cloaker, the trapper, the piercer, the roper. So many of these things, and sure, were some of them ridiculous? Sure, I agree with that. But the point was to not only have encounters with evil big baddies, but to have these encounters happen in regions in the adventure where the player characters had to outthink, not necessarily outbattle. And more often than not, a lot of times the you wouldn't win by going toe to toe. You just would not win. So you had to find information. And sometimes that information dealt with the creature's behavior. For example, if you fought animated statues, they were impossible to chop stone or metal or something, but a lot of times those statues would throw you out the room, slam the door, and go back to their pedestals and reset. And you're like, oh, the PCs are like, okay, this is the third time we tried to go through it. There's got to be another way. Is there a way to a key of some sort, a MacGuffin that we can use to get from one place to another? I set up one thing like that where all the statues had keys around their neck and then a keyhole in their back, but each key, the statue that had the key matched another statue in the room, or it was like a mechanism, like a gear metallic iron golems or something like that. But that was the point of having those monsters. And today, the default of just adding more hit points just makes it a slog. It's just like, okay, you attack me, all right, I attack it. You attack me, I attack it. And I think it does a disservice for the originality and the creativity of a lot of the people taking part in these adventures. Our Zamar says they have become more simplified by spelling out more of what they can or cannot do. When was the last time you saw a goblin with a magic dagger or orc use a 10-foot pole? We used to, when we started out, we had random treasure tables, and when we rolled for the treasure, if it made sense for that monster to have it, we would just give it to the monster. The orc would use the magic weapon that was in the treasure. The healing potion, the bugbear would drink the healing potion. The dragons had a treasure hoard, and we made those dragons use that treasure hoard up every time. It would read off scrolls. It would use the orbs of whatever might. It would have around its head those iron stones that would float around the head. I mean, it was crazy. And I'm like, there's zero reason why an intelligent species wouldn't use the very magic that is in its hoard for whatever reason, right? Like, and that was the cool thing, because you could introduce the using magic and magic items as an example. You could introduce them because it was being used against the PCs, and then when they recovered it, they felt like they earned it. Like, wow, man, that flame tongue sword. I can't believe the ogre used that flame tongue sword, but I'm so glad we killed it, and now I get to have it. Right? That was the thing. Zamara says, also people use less of non-manual monsters. It's a thing I realized when you brought up the topic yesterday, because it's what I do. If there isn't a base monster in a manual, it doesn't exist. That again, this from the OSR, monster stat blocks on their own, really, to be honest with you, it really doesn't tell you much. As a matter of fact, to a certain extent, some of the OSR monsters could be written on one, maybe two lines of text, and it really didn't tell you anything at all. But what I feel they did do is give you um, those rule systems gave you a ton of tools to use as a dungeon master to basically make challenging encounters against your player characters. Someone, and I am so sorry I didn't bring this up, but someone made a comment about the fact that when you start reading some of the OSR rules, they were actually a lot more sophisticated and detailed than people thought. Of an example would be like uh, OSR stat blocks were very small, pretty ridiculously small. It was like AC, some kind of hit bonus, you'd have some damage, and then you'd have like a special effect that the monster had. But the rest of the monster told you like what was it going after? What was it trying to kill? What was it trying to eat? What could you scare it away with? What could you entice it with? Um, and also spread throughout the OSR books of the very beginnings of the iterations, it would tell you like, hey, this monster definitely is going to fly down and try to grapple a PC and lift them into the air, or this other monster is going to hide and wait for somebody to be, it'll spring out when the PCs are in another location in danger. That's why you had monsters like, anybody remember the Screecher? The Screecher was a mushroom, and when you got close to the mushroom, this is Gygaxian monsters again. You get close to the mushroom, and the mushroom would screech out. It would make a loud noise. It would just make a big wailing, warbling noise. They at one point they gave it an armor class and hit points, but it never did anything except make noise. It didn't attack anyone or anything. But what its purpose was is that the minute it made noise, it instantly caused the dungeon master to reach for dice and start rolling on random encounter tables. And every time it kept screeching, the incidence of rolling on that random encounter table kept going up and up and up. And the point was, as when you were a fragile character, you couldn't. There was no reason to have an unwanted encounter at all. It was like it was a waste of your resources, your time. You're probably going to get killed over some BS because some monsters were wandering around the dungeon, which I'm going to explain wandering monsters and random encounters in just a minute here. But the point of that was when the wandering monster encounter table was utilized more and more, it just prevented you from getting further in the dungeon. The Screecher was annoying, but it was actually dangerous because of what it did. And so the monster ecologies were a host. And what actually bothers me about the monster ecologies today is you don't see it any longer. And I'm going like, why wouldn't you? I mean, I remember opening up monster manuals, and you'd had like 15 different orcs and 13 different goblins jammed in there, and like they'd have an orc chieftain, an orc shaman, an orc assassin. They'd have a bunch of them in there, and in no small part, they would just throw some random magic on some of these monsters. They throw some special abilities on them. You could pick and choose, and it really, really suggested to you, like, listen, if you're going to have some giants in there, give a couple of the giants a little bit of extra. Give them a little, bump up their armor class a little bit. Give them a little bit extra damage. Also, have them wait in the background or something. It was a ton of information. That information belongs to WotC today. I don't know why they don't use it. It's free. Like they can cut and paste it, maybe update it a little bit, but I don't understand. Anyway, getting back to our co-host, Zamara says also because combat became more of a focus in third edition, the stat blocks of monsters became more spelled out and more focused on the combat portion of things. The background info was small or non-existent. Yeah, it did shrink down. As the stat blocks grew, the ecologies shrunk to try to fit them like, a single page. And because the OSR stat blocks were so small, you could fit a lot more information about what the motivation of the monster was. Something as simple as morale was an important facet of the game. Now, did everybody use it? No, but morale gave us a sense that not every monster wanted to die. If you did a certain thing, some monsters, like it would tell you in the rules, hey, if you, I don't know, I'm just making pulling something out of my ass, but like if you fought off a pack of wolves, if you, swung around lighted torches or used magic or something, roll, make an extra morale check, right? If the orc chieftain gets his ass wiped, make a morale check. If the and these things existed because it was a guide for us as dungeon masters to say, hey, listen, these monsters are probably going to, run and to live and fight another day. And the great idea about that was that as player characters, you knew you could scare off maybe some kobolds or parlay with some goblins or go toe to toe, threaten some giants, but they might be back. The idea of negotiating with monsters, it was never one and done. I think today there's a fear of like, well, if my players are walking around with an ogre, they're just going to trounce the rest of my encounter. That ogre was not meant to stay with the party for like 5 weeks. It was that that ogre was like, I'll stay for about an hour or two, but I'm probably going to backstab you, right? Like everybody knew that was going to be the thing. Anyway, pumpkin ghost, ghosts of pumpkins. That's cool. Anyway, Pumpkin Ghost says ecology sections used to be great in AD&D. It taught you that some oozes can be lured by heat. Yep, items that might make monsters recoil away, or even parts you could salvage to make into magic items or armor. Oh, that was a collecting monster body parts and things. Oh, that was a whole adventure. That was a whole thing unto itself. That's why, remember the old fire beetles? Fire beetles had some kind of gland that would glow, and the whole point of fire beetles was to kill them and collect the fluid in the gland to use as light to go further down into the dungeons because you would run out of torches. I mean, strange to have a Gygaxian monster like a fire beetle, but it was cool because then the players are like, should we stop and kill the fire beetles? Or maybe they see fire beetles and they're like, ooh, I bet there might be a society around here, there were little things that you would place into the adventure, and a lot of the adventure modules would tell you, hey, uh, I'm the gargoyles are all wearing medallions or something, and the PCs are like, they're wearing medallion. They're actually like clothed a little bit. Why are they clothed? And then you realize, like, well, the medallions allow the wizard that's at the top of the wizard tower to see and hear everything the gargoyles see and hear. So then the PCs are like, ooh, we don't want to fight the gargoyles. We need to hide because the wizard can see everything we're doing and where we are at going up the wizard tower or whatever. Some of the challenges were very simple. Some of them were complicated, but they just left a host of ideas, and I loved it. All right, let's see. JP says, I love the idea, the theory, the style, the invocation of level drain. It was the numbers that sucked the life out of it, literally. Yes. Yeah, it's a shame that they weren't able to use some kind of layering effect, like instead of literally level drain, because level drain was a pain in the ass to do. Not only was it threatening, and you went through all the trouble of gaining levels, but then you had to rejigger. Okay, do I lose any spells? What are my new hit points? For rogues, it was like you had to recalculate your percentages on like hide and shadows and move silent. It was horrible, horrible. I wish they had a level drain condition, but oh well. Zamara says, I used Screecher as a trap when I played in a campaign in Pathfinder First Edition. They were meant to draw attention. It was good for drawing bears and stuff into a deadly enemy so you could sneak in. Yeah, that's another thing too of players using and abusing the dungeon itself, which isn't often. Sorry, my microphone is starting moving around a little bit. Which isn't often a thing that is. It's more story focused today because of so many people that are putting out like live and actual plays, but using and abusing the dungeon was a thing back in the past. It's like, oh, we went around the pit trap. I see your microphone. We went around the pit trap, but maybe later on, what we'll do is we'll make an illusion over top of the pit trap and make the undead that was following us fall into that same pit trap, right? Or the gelatinous cube that's in the hallway that we just narrowly avoided. We'll let the skeletons walk into that, and yeah, I really like that. Mike says I challenge others to actually read the 5e monster manual, not the stat blocks, the pages of lore, the little green boxes. There's a ton of info that gets ignored. Um, I can't agree with you more there, Mike. Like I read the passage about handing out experience points in a past stream. Like I think it was Monday. That was from 1995. That was 28 years ago, and it's like experience points wasn't about killing monsters. It was about more than that. Yeah. Zamar says that all depends if the level drained XP rather than levels directly, causing no one to lose a level of they lost enough XP, it softens the blow while keeping the threat alive. I mean, I guess you could do a level drain and then calculate everything, say at the end of the session or something. But yeah, it made sense. It was very gamist. It wasn't. Yeah, it was problematic the way it was done. But man, it was like yeah, I loved it. Um, Mike says elf immunity to ghoul paralysis. It's not in the stat block. It's buried in the lore. That's a. I forgot about the elf immunity to ghoul paralysis. It was in the lore. There were some other things too, like um, demi humans weren't the same undead as humans were when they were turned. Mike brings up the hag eye. Yeah, in our games we had an illicit drug, I guess you could called hag's milk, and it anyway. It was pretty nasty to think about drinking it. And Mike says half of the out of the box. Let me put that in there. Mike says half of the out of the box adventures are based on fine print. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in fine print. Trolls taking on the aspect of the things that they consume is a fine print thing. Yeah, Zamar says you are correct. Talking to Mike, like there are now a lot that's buried in the extra books away from the main monster stat block, and that's an issue, an accessibility issue. I definitely agree. I feel like a way to give dungeon masters more tools. We have plenty of player tools, new magic items, new class features, new options for player characters, new backgrounds, new subclasses, and all that stuff. Right? Not a lot of tools for dungeon masters, or at least it feels like not as much um, ingenuity is put into giving dungeon masters tools, and yeah, it's just it's unfortunate. A lot of that stuff was so cool to have. Like Mike Gould says, and monster parts were a huge part of AD&D. Fire beetle glands, vampire dust, beholder eyes, yeah, dragon scales, all worth a lot of money. Oh, PCs love some dragon scales because everybody wanted to get like enchant some dragon armor and or a shield made out of like a single scale or something like that. Yeah. Oh man, and especially use them for a lot of those were used for like spell components or for magic item rituals in the creation of specific magical effects and such. We had a game where there, if you guys remember the old arrows of slaying, and in the old AD&D, if a creature got hit with an arrow slaying arrow, it just died. There wasn't damage or anything. It just straight up died. And our PCs, like in the game, there was a Fletcher that could create them, but you needed material from the monster so that you could make an arrow slaying arrow. And we had a guy that was an archer. He wanted like a whole quiver of like an arrow for everything. It's pretty ridiculous, but it was fun. It was like, I want a beholder eye to make an arrow to kill it. And everyone's like, how are you going to get a beholder eye in the first place? And if you could kill it, do you really need the arrow? It was pretty ridiculous, but whatever. Pumpkin Ghost says Pathfinder makes level drain a bit easier. It functions more like a creature template than having to do all that math. Yeah, yeah, but also today, and I get why there was big changes, but charms, paralysis, things that take player characters out of the game had such long lengths on them that basically you sat there twiddling your thumbs. So I understand why some elements were taken out, but I think there could have been a better method to organize some of that to make that, like, for example, um, there could be other indie games use something called consequences. I'm talking about Fate and Powered by the Apocalypse and a ton of other indie games where maybe a player character isn't necessarily reduced in any way, but one of the conditions that they receive could be something that complicates their life further. Like, for example, maybe if a character is bitten by a creature and they don't get it healed correctly, the scent draws other creatures of its type. So the PC is constantly being, I don't know, tracked or targeted by beasts or aberrants or something, or a creature suffers psychic damage, and suddenly their thoughts are being broadcast to other psychic aberrant creatures in the region, or maybe when a character casts a spell, the other spellcasters that are enemies know exactly what spell is being cast and where and when it's being cast as it's being done, right? Like, or something like that. Like, maybe there's extended conditions that don't have a direct numerical penalty where the PC just feels useless, but maybe it just complicates their life. And I think that might have been a better way use of that. I don't know. John Rice says psionics of creatures like the Illithid was also a major pain. Psionics, yeah, the mind flayers were relatively squishy and stabbable if you could get past their mind attacks. That is very true. Like it. Mind flayers very rarely you found individually. They always had like enslaved, mentally conditioned monsters around them. There were even very a lot of hints and tools from the OSR about like BFF creatures, like wargs were the pets and mounts of goblinoids, or hellhounds were always they were used by denizens of the lower planes as like scouts and things like that, with the some of the more minor devils or demons or whatever being used as, like, on flaming chains or something. Like, they combined and mixed and matched a lot of those monsters to, you know give them a little bit of diversity when it comes to your challenges. Like, oh, where there's 8 flying monsters and 6 land-based monsters, and there's 2 of them that are incorporeal or something, or ethereal or whatever, that kind of stuff. Pumpkin Ghost mentions, yeah, elves could turn into banshees. That's right. If conditions are met about how they got killed, and demi-humans would die instead of transform if they got lycanthropy. I forgot about that. But see, that's even another thing. I wasn't wasn't there a monster that was allergic to elven blood that wouldn't consume it was something. There were a bunch of little things like that in the lore, which might change how the player characters entered into a combat, right? Like, well, let's put the dwarf in front instead of the elf, because the monster or creature really didn't want to devour the dwarf because humans taste a whole lot better. I mean, it sounds kind of strange, but yeah. Yeah, yeah, but Mike says it's like our conversation yesterday. Yep, the tools are there, but there's no talk about using them, like strength, lift, and carrying. Yeah, ignition, environmental effects. Yep, like here's a very common one. Mike and I had a little conversation yesterday talking about giant-sized monsters, large, huge, gigantic, whatever, giants, dragons, um, uh, monstrous entities that could lift huge weights. A lot of them never really had to attack you on sight. They could just cause cave-ins, or landslides, or avalanches, or a giant could rip a friggin' tree out the ground and use it as a club and just like sweep PCs away and whatnot. Forget it. Often, a lot of times, we forgot that, like, giants, while their stat blocks are kind of boring, um, they could be pretty damn dangerous, you know. You know what I mean? Especially if they pick up a giant rock and like throw it on top of you. I remember playing a game in a the dungeon master had the giants, you know, because the giant, a lot of the giant types can pick up a rock and throw it. And instead, what he was doing is the giants would basically throw rocks down and they kept cutting off where we could run on the battlefield. So they were making these like, it was like Tron walls that were being put up every time the giants would throw a rock down. And we either had to scale over the rock or try to get around it. It was pretty, it was fun because he was trying to come up with something. And we had a blast. It was like, oh no, 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 because we would roll initiative every round. That's another big thing about initiative. But we would roll initiative differently every round, and whenever somebody got it, like make a beeline and get past the rocks. They would like try to run, and a giant would throw a rock down, and we were stuck on the other side of the rocks. It was very fun. It was very fun. Puppy goes to speaking of more monster materials. I remember basilisks. Yep, being a good intro to petrification monsters since its blood can return PCs back to normal. That's right. That's right. Like if a PC got turned to stone, it was so you could introduce petrification to player characters before the spell flesh to stone and stone to flesh was accessible. And you had to use basilisk. You could use basilisk blood to turn them back. I forgot about that. All that. Hey, John Andrew. Yeah, hey, what's going on there? Thralls of creatures. Yep, a lot of creatures had thralls to themselves, like wraiths and wights. Wight. One made the other. Was it what was it? Wights made wraiths so that if they killed party members or NPCs that would happen. I wish I had made this up. The same dungeon master had people in the dungeon and we had to save them. And I remember a wight was going down there and would slay an NPC to make another wraith while we were trying to save them. And we were like, this is effed up, man. It was like his own, he kept spawning more and more wraiths and we just ran for it. It was effed up too. But yeah, we ran for it because he kept just killing a random like 3 hit point NPC. Captured person is kept making another one and another one and another one. Shadows do that as well, right? It's crazy. Zamar says, I'm in a camp, honestly, that the GM should be given the tools to remove tools from the players' characters. The players should be given the tools to defend themselves from the GM's NPCs. Now, I'm going to bring this up here as well. And this, I think, is a problematic thing for character generation. And that is because I had this slight conversation with someone. It wasn't, we weren't battling, but I was trying to explain to someone that magic is available across the board basically today. And the guy was saying, well, no, no, it isn't. All the character classes don't have spell casting ability. And my point was, I was trying to say, like, it's not spell casting, it's character abilities that are class functions that are arcane and magical, but they fall outside the rules of magic in the way, like, for example, um, Barbarian Rage, Bardic Inspiration, um, Paladin Smites. What's another one? Well, a Druidic Wild Shaping. It falls outside the rules. You can't dispel it. It does it. Is it if you're in an anti magic shell? Does it work in that? Um, can it be duplicated? I mean, it falls outside the rules. And Mage Hand. Cantrips in general, right? Like, why isn't there a 0 level anti cantrip? Like, there are abilities that don't have counter abilities, and it's kind of strange. The OSR, there was a counter to damn near for everything that was for everything that you could do or a monster could do, there was a counter to that thing. Now it might not be, you might not be able to find it next to the thing you wanted to do, but it existed. Like, for example, becoming ethereal was a monster capability that was extremely dangerous. But eventually players got the ability to gain like magic items and spells that could make themselves ethereal. And then you start to fight on the equal level. It was just really weird. Let monsters be monstrous. Yeah, yeah. John Rice's Paladins lay on hands falls outside of, like, is it a healing spell? It, I mean, does it fall under those rules? It's just weird how things were, and I understand that some of it is to make players feel heroic, to feel better than human, superhuman in a way. To bypass the zero and go straight to hero. But as far as game mastering goes, the OSR gave a lot of tools to create challenges and consequences for player characters' actions, and then for the players to dig themselves out of that challenge, right? It wasn't, yes, there was a lot of save or die stuff. Maybe some of that, maybe we don't need any of that, right? But on the other hand, there was a reason why, like, the wizard got the magic and other people didn't. Because now, eh, honestly, like a party of 4 or 5 people, 75% of them are casting magic just as good, or if not better, than the wizards themselves. So yeah. Yeah, Mike even says there's no consequences for dying anymore either. Resurrection was never guaranteed. Scarring, limb loss, etc. seems gone. And let's remember, I don't know if any of you guys remember this, but those of a certain age remember when underneath Constitution, there was a percentage chance you would not come back no matter what happened. There was a percentage chance, it was like 60. If you had I'm just pulling this out of my ass, but it's like if you had a Constitution of 11, you had a 62% chance of not being resurrectable at all. You just had system shock. You try to come back to life and go, I'm back. Nope. No, I'm not. um, Resurrection, that was reincarnation was a spell that you could come back like as a weasel or a bat or a bullywog or something. Yeah. Zamar says, I will be honest. I think scarring and missing limbs were more of a common house rule thing in second edition and below. I don't recall ever seeing any rules in it in the DMG books that I have. I do remember losing stat abilities and having system shock. And I do remember there being like there being um, optional rules for like limb loss, losing an eye, permanently scarred and injured, and things like that. You guys are getting ahead of me. Okay. Yeah, Mike says, let monsters be monstrous. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there were a lot of monsters. Today, they don't really do it as much, but there were a lot of monsters that attacked PCs in ways other than hit point loss. So you could lose you could lose spell levels through drain. You had life drain. You had stat loss, like the I believe ghosts kind of did that, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, ghosts did possessions. Shadows were notorious for draining strength, but there were other monsters out there that attacked PCs in ways that it was a different vector to protect yourself from psychically. You had you were slowed down, so you lost some of your attacks. You were there were things where you were attacked where you became confused, or you had memory loss. And a big one was aging. You actually had to record the age of your character in the OSR because some monsters and effects, curses, cursed magic items, things would actually age your character, and there were stat bonuses slash penalties that would happen to your character if your character aged out. So that there was a reason why age and weight had a specific part to it. Also, the weight of your character mattered because if you walk through the using exploration, if you walked over certain areas and you had too much weight, you would activate a trap and such. Um, yeah, Pumpkin Ghost says a few monsters that had a sweet tooth for demi-humans was the Boule. Yep, the land shark, loving horses and halflings, and several giants find dwarf flesh extremely delicious. I can't remember which one hated the taste of elf, but yeah, there were some of those, and that lore, that little piece of lore, actually helped you as a dungeon master because then it told you it took the unfairness of piling on one PC versus another to say, "Hey, listen, there's a reason why these monsters are going after the elf, or there's a reason why the ooze or the ghosts or whatever monsters you're using are not going after the halfling but the humans, right? When the boule digs through the ground and jumps up at the humans, or well, the horses and halflings, there's a reason why they went after the halfling because they taste better, and that's actually kind of cool, right? Yep, that's actually kind of cool. You guys are getting well ahead of me. All right, let's see. Yeah, John Wright says it used to be that if you were resurrected, you had a permanent loss of 1 point of Constitution, and Constitution then affected other things like your hit point maximum and things like that. Yep, yep, yep. Pumpkin says so they did ignore elves a lot because they usually didn't wear metal for them to devour. Ooh. Isabel's like, hey, DBJ, once again, yep, a level 1 PC versus a CR4 challenge of 3 bandits and a bandit captain, and he won. Superhuman, superhuman, right? Yeah, Manticore. Oh, I loved Manticores. I love Little Man. Uh, John Andrews says class feature descriptions are magical and dispellable if they list the words magic, magical, magically, etc. Same idea. They are powered by a spell slot. Yes, that well, and you know me, I'm being very generalized, but I will say that not only do I agree with you, but I also think I would dare say some players would argue that that's not the case, right? Like, is bardic inspiration magical? Let me be more specific. Some class features, especially the lower tier one, y- you could make the case that they're not very magical at all, right? Like a bard between first and fourth level is like encouraging the players to be better and stuff. And you could say, well, they're not magical. But some of the effects that go on as you start gaining levels, there's no way to account for a barbarian using their rage to fly, right? Like that's a little like that's not human. That's definitely magical. Yep. Oh yeah, Mike says shadows would drain strength and ghosts would age you. But I did, but that's not me arguing with you there, John Andrew. I'm saying I'm wrong, and I also agree with you. But I'm saying like, could you make the argument? Would a PC, a rules lawyer PC argue against? I think they might. I think they might. Oh, Mike says spells aged you too. Casting wish, limited wish, resurrection aged the cat. I forgot about that. Ooh, yeah. Haste spell would age you 1 year, which prevented you from spamming the spell. You really only used it when you really needed it. I forgot about that stuff. Bookworms, yeah. Pumpkin Ghost says, yeah, stuff like bookworms would eat spell books. Um, Mage Dooms were immune to magic and targeted wizards to drain spells. Memory Moss, I forgot all about these. Memory Moss would take your memories away. Goes on to say, Pumpkin Ghost goes on to say, I forget what slime was called, but it basically just existed to drop down on lit torches and snuff the light out. I forgot about that. Yes. Okay. So, um, standees. Sorry. Side note. Yes, these are standees behind me. I have a Black Panther one that I have to fix. That's because I had an old Black Panther one that got damaged. I got a new Black Panther one. I have Invis Ness from Solo as well, and who else is back there? I can't remember. But yes, that is there's two aquatic people. So Namor, of course, with his arms folded. Of course, we have Falcon here, and such. And yes, I will point it out so you don't have to. Uh, they are primarily people of color, but I like the standees. And I tried to find like dragons and things like that, and I went, nah, let me get the standees. They're expensive. Okay. Anyway, back to this. John Andrews says one of my favorite ways to press back against PC agency is to give NPCs the same abilities, yes, as PCs, levels, abilities, feats, etc. Absolutely. Yeah. And, oh, and John Andrews agreeing with me. Wow. Okay. Yes, you are correct. The rules lawyer would argue the point. Any point, really. PC's class features are unhinged. Now, I will say that when it comes to, because let me hard segue back into our monster discussion about OSR versus today. Um, Again, it wasn't the stat blocks. It wasn't really about the stat block, right? It wasn't about uh oh, talk about freezing fluids. Yeah, the biggest change in newer editions is that both gear and environmental effects are ignored. Oh, that's right. Ignition should set the surroundings on fire. Acid or poison should spoil food and water supplies. Cold should freeze fluids. If I don't, okay, so I don't know if you guys remember the original Dungeon Master's Guide, but if I remember correctly, if a player character failed a saving throw, you went to a chart and the items that the PC was carrying, they had to make saving throws against their hardness, against the attack that happened. And I remember being in a game where a PC got splashed by Black Dragon's acid and basically stepped out of the acid burns, naked, magic items gone, everything gone. Same thing would happen if you fell. If you fell, you would shatter potions. If you were set on fire, your scrolls could catch on fire. There was a lot of that stuff. Mike said spoiled food was a big deal as well because starvation was on the table. Yeah, yeah, and another thing that is often forgotten is that today we think of like a video game, today we think of monsters as being one and done. So PCs are in dungeon, they go to door, they listen to door, they use their 10-foot pole, they open up door if they can, or they try to push it open or kick the door open. They go inside room, monsters in room, have battle, leave room, go somewhere else. But in the OSR, it was almost never one and done. And what I mean by that is when you negotiated, parlayed, ran from, um, used illusions, hid, deceived, decoyed monsters, they were still around. They still existed. So it wasn't as if they ran and you never saw them again. What actually happened was they were still around and they actually could still be a problem, right? It was when the hag set her hag's children after you, maybe a couple of trolls or an ogre or minotaur or something after the PCs, and the hag left, they came back to fight another day. Those kobolds, like those 5 kobolds that ran away and didn't want to fight the PCs, they were scouts. They were the goblinoid, the orc hordes would send out scouts and forward, members. And when you encountered 5 or 10 of them, PCs in the OSR knew if you saw 5, there's probably 50 behind them. And so, what do? Do you kill the scouts knowing that it's going to set off alarm? Do you go after them knowing that 1 or 2 of them are going to run or blow a horn and cause reinforcements? I mean, it wasn't. It was. It wasn't one and done. It was the idea behind it was to teach the DM that it was a living world. And so even though there might not have been world building in the classic sense, it was it was emergent world building. So if you rolled a random couple of monsters, you would see those monsters, and if the PCs ignored them, they still existed. They were still around somewhere. Um yeah. Michael, yeah, Dragon Breath would wreck your shit. Yes, it would. Dragon Breath would wreck your shit. Pumpkin Ghost says, "Ah, yeah, the Shatter spell could remove an entire party's potion collection. Good times." For some reason, I picture you leaning back, hands on the stomach, smiling with a Cheshire grin. But sorry, that's just me. Is that the End King? Okay. Says I learned the game through 3.5. I never encountered a lot of the older gotcha monsters, but they sound hilariously evil. They were like some of the gotcha monsters. I label them Gygaxian monsters because they're kind of like the during the Gygax era of TSR. Now, like I said, were they advanced to modern day and kind of recontextualized? Sure. I feel like I feel like we need more of them now. And what I mean by it is either redefine them or come up with monsters that make sense that we don't have to be ridiculous, but monsters that challenge players in ways other than hit point loss, right? Like today, what are some abilities? We got class features. We have stat draining other than shadows drain strength. Why is there artificial scarcity amongst damage types, um, amongst other threats? Like, for example, something that blocks spell levels or something, right? You PC gets attacked, wizard gets attacked by something, now they can't cast any spells of third level or higher. And then when they get attacked again, they can't cast anything of second level or higher. And they're like, I'm going to have to go after the arcane thought eater or whatever the case might be to get back my spells or release me from its drain or something like that, or it grappled me around the throat and the back of my head. I've got to get it off of me, something like that. Mm-mm-mm. Mike says older games were like living in the world of The Witcher. Newer games were like living in the MCU. Yeah, it's quite a bit sanitized, very sanitized. Zamara says starving. Just eat a good berry. Actually, have the PCs run across a thriving town in a barren land run by a tyrant druid who knows the good berry spell, modified to make good berries from rocks. Yeah, now everybody's dependent upon the druid. Talk about your comment there, Z. I had a draconian government of clerics that would heal, and in the public square they would torture people and then heal the wounds and torture them over and over again. And the PCs were just like, we are not going to the healers in this town. but yeah, they were like that's horrible, and I said, yep, it is exactly right, that is absolutely horrible. And King says one of the classes in 5e is literally Iron Man, so that tracks. Isn't it one of the artificer types where you have armor and you could modify it with like magic and stuff? Yeah. John Rice says one of the best uses of lightning was to aim for a pool of water that multiple enemies were standing in. Yep. Yes, pumpkin ghost. Yes. um, but what was it? The shocking grasp spell. Wow, I can't believe my mind farted like that. Shocking grasp spell. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You would go after metal or metal layered individuals so that they wouldn't be able to resist it and it would arc off of them and things like that. Yep. Yep, absolutely. Pumpkin says speaking of dragon breath, one neat one was the paper dragon. I don't remember that one. A scroll origami into the shape of a dragon would tear out pages of spell books and breathe the spell as its breath weapon. I never heard of that one. I love that. I love that a lot. Oh man, wow. Weren't there some monsters that if hit by a spell, they either redirected them. Oh, what was it? Snail flail would redirect spells, but I believe there were multiple monsters that could absorb them and either got stronger or could redirect the spell and use it for themselves. I can't remember which monsters. I know there were magic items that did it, but I remember it was a monster. Although I remember fighting a monster that had a ring that could absorb and reflect spells, and the monster used it. I don't know, it's like a Rakshasa or something like that. Mike's fireballs are now used like someone like lit a fart. Brief flame and done. Here's some math for you. A 20-foot radius fireball fills 84 individual 10 by 10-foot cubes. Casting fireball in small confines still fills that space. That means halls, around corners, out of windows. Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, the danger of a fireball in a dungeon was that it yes, it was a big orb. So if you were standing on a flat plane and you cast, it was an orb. And that orb, when confined in a space, would flash down up and down hallways, and you could kill off a whole party by an incorrectly cast fireball because a wizard would go, "Oh, I can cast it." I'm just making this up, right? I can cast it 60 feet away, so as a ball, a maximum range of 30 feet, it's not going to hit me. And you were like, "No, mm-mm." Lightning bolt did the same thing. Lightning bolts would bounce, and they would bounce up back and forth through walls and up and down hallways. It was Ricochet. Yep, there you go. Yeah, John Wright. Sorry about that, John Wright. You get the credit for that, not me. Says we would treat lightning bolts like pool table balls, where you you could sort of aim the ricochet where you want it. Yeah. Pumpkin says Paper Dragon was in Dragon magazine. After it ate the spell page, you could unfold it after you defeated it to get your page back. Ooh, if it ate multiple pages, you only got the last one it ate. Oh wow, damn, I love that. And see, and see, here's the thing about what I love about puzzle monsters, and I don't know if this is a good description or not, but what I love about puzzle monsters is the idea like the paper dragon, which I forgot that it even existed. I don't remember ever encountering it, but the idea of let's say a monster drains spells or spell levels, and you if you go after that monster to get it back, you get it back. It becomes a challenge. It's not a nerf. It's a hey, the wizard's going to the party. Hey, I need to get my last five spells back, and the PCs are like, we're moving on ahead. We don't need to do that. The marshals like didn't affect me none. Yeah, Pumpkin Ghost says could have been named Scroll Dragon. Yeah, but even so, Zamar says, God, so many ideas. I want to run a game using the spells to show how horrifically controlled the world would look if those spells were actually applied. See DBJ's old spell series for more info. You know what? I did a whole. I should go back to that. Since we're getting to the end, side note here, I have some old videos, and I did maybe half a dozen or something, where we talked about taking a very simple thing in classic Dungeons and Dragons, like a floating disc spell, like a magic missile or a healing spell or something like that. Goodberry is a good one to use, um, and extrapolating out the bigger world effects of what would happen if that spell became widespread. And it wasn't that we went specifically down one rabbit hole. Like here's a single rabbit hole. Goodberry becomes um, used so much that the population uh, stops learning the skill to harvest and instead becomes addicted to Goodberry. And my intention was not just to do that, but like, would there be like a black market, or would this become an addiction? Would the people change? Like, would they have this permanent? I'm just imagining this permanent staining of the fingers in the mouth, of like this purple stains in their fingers because they kept eating good berries all the time, and maybe other foods made like if they ate like chicken or rice or lima beans or something, like they'd get stomach pains and kind of vomit because they didn't like the smell of it, because they needed a good berry, and they'd make like good berry wines and things like, I mean, it was just a fun series. And maybe we'll go back to that because it was fun coming up with like, oh, here's some cool things. Oh, here's some really dangerous things. Uh, I remember doing one on the guidance spell where there was guild factions that would give people stand over people, giving them the guidance spell as long as they devoted themselves to the religious sect that could give the guidance spell in the first place. And then the people became better at it because the guidance was there, which meant that they felt like they were lost without it and stuff. And it went on and on and on and on. So that's what. Anyway, it was fun. Yeah. John Andrews says like healing word sucks when your opponent has it too. Yeah. 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 This is JB says let all monsters make death saving throws and have healers on their side of battle. You know, even okay, I it sounds like you're being sarcastic, but here's how you're not being sarcastic. Why isn't that a tool for dungeon masters? Look, why isn't that an official tool? Dungeon Master's Guide. It's been sitting in front of me. Why isn't that an official tool to say to the players, hey guys, if you come up with a devastatingly really good way to use something you have, then that gives me the option to do the same thing, right? Why isn't that part of this book? Why isn't that a suggestion? I remember someone had what was the suggestion? It was use a friend spell, feign death, cut their throat. So it was like in a Reddit thread where some a player was like was using the friend spell to befriend a monster, convince them to use the feign death spell, and when they feign death to go to sleep or use the sleep spell on them, then they would just cut their throat. And it was like it was like a 1-2, it was like a 1-2-3 punch, right? And the dungeon master was just like, well, I don't know what to do to stop this. And everyone was like, use it against them, you know. Johnny says, I'm not being sarcastic. That is the official tool. It's really empowering for the DM. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Guidance in 5e is broken. Yep. Stinking cloud attacks a village. Yep. And I actually one of the rules I used for what if magic was widespread was, this is my head canon, that every spell from cantrip up was only seen half as much as the spell level before it. So a third level spell was seen half as much as the second level, seen half as much as the first level, seen half as much as a cantrip. So I really focused on cantrips, first level spells, maybe a few second level, because after that, I feel like in my head canon that they become far more rare because the people who could do them. Like for example, how many people? It's like how many brain surgeons are there in the world versus general practitioners? That's kind of how I looked at it. Yeah. Yeah, the only Zamar says having a reviving spell roam across the land, fighting the power word kill spell. People randomly dying and the dead randomly resurrected. Ow! Talking about living spells. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, because Mike brings up consider living spells. Spells cast in a wild magic area have a chance of becoming sentient. A wandering illusion impersonating people and things. A fireball rolls across the plains. I love that idea. I actually love that. And to be honest with you, I kind of stole that idea and used it for level up advanced fifth edition. We added that into a random encounter. No, no, it's an exploration benefit in a tier 3, I think tier 3 or tier 4. So during an exploration challenge, if a PC casts a spell, the spell temporarily becomes living. Anyway, but anyway, yeah, yeah. The End King, it was a comment that you said. The only thing to be wary of if the enemies all make death saving throws, that could encourage a ruthlessness from the players. And if you want to play a heroic campaign, that might be a conflict. I agree. Also, murdering player characters now is a conscious choice by the dungeon master to attack a downed PC over and over again, and I can see how that can change the way things are done. So it's a shame. Well, all right. Mike says, well, King Monsters should behave accordingly too. Oozes should flow over and eat fallen foes. Yep. Giant toads should pop away with swallowed prey. Yeah, golems should attack without fear. Undead hate life and should continue to attack fallen heroes. And everything that you just said, Mike, both makes them dangerous, predictable, and has a limitation. Let's say PCs are being attacked by a horde of zombies. Okay, the zombies are going to, if a PC goes down, the zombies are going to rip their flesh. But let's say that zombie leaps across a 10-foot pit. Do the zombies stop at the pit or do they go over? My thing was, I like to use the rule of give and take. So if I give the zombies lethalness, I'm going to also take away from them mindfulness. So if a PC jumps across a 10-foot pit to convince the zombies to fall into the pit and try to scramble after, I would absolutely let that happen. I would let that happen. Period. Yep. Mike says heroes survive based on the entitlement of victory. I'm unconscious. Why is the skeleton murdering me? I know. I know. Yeah. We're going to end it on that one. Tomorrow, what should we go into? You know what? Tomorrow we are going to talk. We're going to continue with the OSR versus D&D. We'll get into magic. We'll get into problematic issues with magic. How it's easy now. How the accessibility. making magic a little bit more, not difficult, but complicated and dangerous and that kind of thing, right? Yeah, let's get into some OSR magic versus the magic deck, and let's get into we'll get into should we or should we not define the parameters of magic, because a lot of spells today super confined spells by spelling everything out. OSR didn't, but did we have more arguments about it? I don't know. So let's get into that tomorrow. Um, oh man, yep. Zombies fall in the pit like ants. Fill it with zombies. Walk straight across it. Yep. Oh man. Topic: why are heroes whiny bitches? Just discuss amongst yourselves. Oh man, I love it. I love it. Yep. Uh, hey, yeah, magic, scaling, cantrips. Yuck, dislike it very much. Yeah, well, let's talk about that. We'll do that. We'll do that tomorrow. So, guys, thank you very much for being part of the show. We always go a little bit late. I started late, but we always go past an hour or whatever. Thank you very much for being here. I saw a bunch of people, like the number of people jump into the show spike and whatnot. So if you guys come back to the show or whatever, I know it's late, but please like, share, subscribe, let people know, or hell, just join in live if you can, or drop a comment or whatever. Thank you very much for being part of the show. I got to get out of here. I got to get out of this place. Have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.